Good evening and welcome. We are going to call to order this special meeting of the Akron Public Schools Board of Education for Monday, June 29th, 2020. Roll call, please.
Dr. Akbar?
Here.
Mr. Alexander?
Present.
Ms. Autry?
Present.
Mr. Bravo? Dr. Hall? Dr. Hall?
Aye.
Mrs. Mansfield?
Here.
Mrs. McKittrick?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And if everyone could mute, we will do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you so much. And looking at our agenda, we are going to turn it over to Mr. Pendleton and the Finance Committee first to take care of our annual appropriations. This is relatively routine, and then after that, we're going to have our presentation on, we'll have to take some votes on those annual appropriations, the cash transfers, and our temporary appropriations. And then we're going to have the presentation on the reopening of school for the 2020-2021 school year. So, Mr. Pendleton and the Finance Committee, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. There's 3 items for your consideration tonight. As President Bravo mentioned, these are fairly routine. The first of these is the permanent appropriation. The permanent appropriations seals the books for fiscal year 20. So that's the 1920 school year ending tomorrow. So that's all spending, all payroll, all purchase services are run through the books. A couple of highlights there. I sent those to you in an email. All funds considered, we're just shy of $600 million business and organization. So we take that responsibility very seriously as an economic engine and one of the largest employers of Akron. So the total appropriations and permanent is $586 million. You can see it broken out by general fund and then all other funds. As been reported in the Return to School COVID Planning Committee and in Finance, we're running between $3 and $4 million under budget. We'll wrap the reconciliation up of June. It's a little bit more lengthy of a reconciliation. The first 2 weeks of July is when we're doing our book work. Also included is the temporary appropriations. Highlights there are we budget as accordance with law at 25% of general fund. We do certify that with the Summit County Budget Commission. You'll notice some round numbers when you look at like special revenue, special trust, where they just have whole dollar amounts. Those are estimates. Those estimates are in accordance with previous trend and again with the Budget Commission. And then when you see specific dollar amounts where you're actually seeing pennies, those likely are federal and state grant awards to the penny. The third and final item tonight is cash transfers. There are 4 items on general fund to secondary summer school. This might be the last year for that transfer, as likely ESSA funds are going to be picking that up in future years. Our annual transfer from our permanent improvement to the 034 maintenance is required by law as our partnership with the state of Ohio that we set aside $500,000 for proactive maintenance on our new facilities. And the 2 remaining general fund to unemployment and general fund to liability self-insurance fund are pretty self-explanatory. Those are annual transfers and how we pay some of our self-insurance liability. And as you can imagine, our unemployment fund needs to be replenished at this time. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Pendleton. Are there any questions for Mr. Pendleton or the Finance Committee on those 3 items?
call?
All right, I'm hearing none, so we will take them in order then, Mr. Pendleton, unless you have any objection. And the first item is resolution is for item 3.1 for the cash transfers. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. A motion by Ms. McKittrick, a second by Ms. Autry. Any comments, question, or discussion on the cash transfers? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mrs. Mansfield?
Yes.
Mrs. McKittrick?
Yes.
Dr. Akbar?
Yes.
Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
Ms. Autry?
Yes.
Mr. Bravo?
Yes.
Dr. Hall?
Aye.
Thank you.
And for item 3.2, final fiscal year 20 appropriations, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Ms. McKittrick, a second by Mr. Alexander. Any comments, question, or discussion on the final fiscal year 20 resolution? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mrs. McKittrick?
Yes.
Dr. Akbar?
Yes. Sorry.
Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
Ms. Autry?
Yes.
Mr. Bravo?
Yes.
Dr. Hall?
Aye.
Mrs. Mansfield?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, item 3.3, the resolution for the temporary beginning fiscal year 21 appropriations. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Ms. McKittrick, a second by Mr. Alexander. Any comments, question, or discussion on the beginning fiscal year 21 appropriations resolution? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Dr. Akbar?
Yes.
Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
Ms. Autry?
Yes.
Mr. Bravo?
Yes.
Dr. Hall? Mrs. Mansfield?
Yes.
Mrs. McKittrick?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we are going to be turning it over to the superintendent and his team and folks around the room here for the presentation on the reopening plan for fall. Just a reminder, and I sent this in an email, we are going to ask that we hold all questions until the end of the presentation. And then if you want, you can queue up and let me know that you have questions. And you may want to write them down in case so you don't forget. And I know that the superintendent and his team and our staff and our partners, including at AEA, and I see them on this meeting as well, have been working really hard on this reopening plan. So thank you for all of your hard work. I know a lot depends on what happens in the coming weeks, but know that we appreciate all of the effort that's gone into it. So Mr. Superintendent, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. President. So first, again, I'd like to thank Pat Shipe, President of the Akron Education Association, and Dr. McWilliams-Woods for really co-chairing this effort, which brought together, I think, approximately 140 people, including staff, some community partners, some parents and students, and really looking at a reopening plan for Akron Public Schools for the fall as we deal with the COVID-19 situation. So the one thing that I want to say is this is where we are now. I want to put a qualifier on it. It can change because, as you know, today from the governor's press conference, I think his plan is to issue guidance this week, maybe as early as Thursday or as late as Thursday. So we'll take a look at that once it comes out to see how that may impact what we're doing. Again, so the health requirements in there will really help shape what our ultimate plan is. There's no vote required tonight. This is for your information. We wanted to preview this with you all. You'll also be getting a copy of the presentation. And then again, as Mr. Bravo said, if you would hold your questions to the end, because we have about 8 different subgroups to this report, and we are asking the co-chairs of each of those subgroups to report out this evening. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. McWilliams-Woods.
Thank you, Superintendent and President of the Board and the rest of the Board. We are very pleased to present to you tonight. This has been quite a journey, as you all know. Back in March, when we actually went into our APS connected learning, learning from home mode, and then to experience that 3-month time period. And then we really started diving about 2 months into this launch and plan for the fall. We knew that we couldn't wait to see what happened from the state perspective on the Ohio Department of Ed side and the governor and the Department of Health. We certainly had to keep learning from their information, but we knew we had to get a head start. So thanks to the superintendent for assigning Pat Shipe and myself to co-chair an amazing team. As you all know, we're here to present our recommendations to you, and then at the next board meeting, we'll bring a formal plan for adoption. But everything that we do, as you know, has to be grounded in our district focus. Going through this COVID experience and making the transition to learning from home, we kept our sole focus on not letting us get derailed because of everything that we were experiencing in the community. We needed to make sure that we kept our district focus front and center, moving forward to prepare each child for success, obviously, is our goal. And we tried to ensure that high quality instruction, our learning conditions, and our very intensive collaboration and engagement with our parents and community, we built that into everything that we did in the spring, and then all of our planning moving forward for this fall. Let's kind of reflect on this past APS connected learning, and we're calling it now 1.0 time. Because we wanted to make sure that we didn't just dive into plans for next year, that we really took time to pause and look at what worked well since we went out and started learning from home back in the middle of March. Major kind of lessons learned was this whole appreciation for the board and for our superintendent doing a 7-year technology investment. We were so much better prepared to be able to be learning from home remotely than so many districts in the state of Ohio and across the country. And that really started back in 2012 with the decision from the board to start investing in our digital learning infrastructure. And that included redesigning our whole tech network and continuously expanding our bandwidth. And that actually happened year to year. Then we also started shifting all of our textbook adoptions to more digital-based curriculum adoptions, so that students had full access to all of their curriculum digitally instead of kind of a static textbook. In 2014, one of the other major investments that we did was our hiring of our technology support specialists who were assigned out in the schools, because we knew without tech support at the schools, we wouldn't be able to have the support that we needed to go one-to-one. And we call that one-to-world. And in 2016, we made the substantial movement towards getting every single student in our district their own laptop computer. We do Chromebooks. And the other important thing was our Google Apps for Education, which is our whole Google platform, our learning management system that we use, that enabled us to make this shift so quickly, where the Google Classroom, that cloud in the sky that teachers used, we already had that in the district. Folks were already trained on that, so we were able to make that shift. Also in 2017, 15-year history of being a part of 100% digital learning in this district. And that started with the Digital Academy, and then we shifted to our own APS Online program. So we are not new to having students learning 100% online. We know how to do that. We've run our own program through the Digital Academy School and then our own APS Online. That experience, we had no idea we were preparing for a pandemic, but boy, did this whole experience of the 7-year timeline enable us to make that shift. And then moving obviously to 2020 with the APS Connected Learning and all of the family and tech support and help desk support and internet support wrapped around that plan. So the big lessons that we learned from this APS Connected Learning 1.0, in addition to that 7-year tech investment, the professional development that we've done over that 7 years certainly helped us, and it helped us hone our digital skills. Educators, it is unbelievable that we flipped this district basically in 2 weeks' time, and all of the examples that you all have been able to see with the project-based learning that was happening and the innovation in the arts that was happening, our core content teachers flipping their classrooms and doing digital lessons. I mean, it was incredible. And that only happens when we have the high quality educators that we have in this district. Management, collaboration, I can't say enough about the relationship that we have with all of our union heads, but from, Chief Academic Officer in particular with Pat Shipe and Michael Householder at AEA. We couldn't have done even the 7 years of investment that we've made and having flipping to an APS remote learning in 2 weeks' time without the collaboration and the time that we all spend together to work out every detail of the implementation. A couple other things that were kind of interesting in our learning from the spring. We did a parent survey, just focused. We've done a number of surveys actually, and you're going to hear through the presentation tonight information that we gathered from parent surveys, teacher surveys, focus groups with staff, students, members on the team. We've kind of gotten lots of information in different modes to make sure we reached sort of a broad audience. But we did a parent survey, and what came out was a high level, excellent or good satisfaction with our APS Connected Learning. 74% responded that way. But the other piece that was interesting is we asked about how much time students spent in their remote learning this spring. And one thing that I wanted to capture and kind of showcase, because it fits with our College and Career Academy focus, is that students who the parents reported were involved in extracurriculars and clubs, in leadership, student council ambassadors, that type of thing, they actually spent more time in the remote learning than students who were not involved in clubs and activities and other things at school. And I wanted to kind of capture that because that's important, that those relationships, and as we planned, we had to make sure, how do we salvage some of those rich student leadership, College and Career Academy experiences and activities is what's driving students' engagement with their learning. The other important things that came out of the parent survey that reflected on this last spring is that 96% of our parents said they have internet at home. 1% said they had no access, and then the other remaining percentage, they had access, but it wasn't necessarily in their home. So it could have been a grandmother, a neighbor that they were using. And so all of the efforts that I think we've done, digital landscape for 7 years now, I think has helped that we've gotten more and more families connected. The families also said the amount of work was appropriate, which was important to us to get that feedback. When we asked parents what the biggest concern, and this is a scientific random sample of parents to make sure we had equity across who we were talking to. The biggest concern, 43% said educating students at home, which we know and understand. It kind of confirms that that's a difficult area for families to be and help support their students at home. And then the second biggest concern, 24%, was unemployment. And I think we had to make sure that these lessons, the major lessons that we learned, that we need to assume that 25% of our families are struggling with unemployment, and we need to take that into consideration in terms of how we plan. So I'm going to turn it over to Pat, who's going to talk through the team and how we pulled the team together. And then we'll go through, we're actually going to step you through the recommendations from all of the 8 teams after you hear about kind of the structure and the process that we used.
Okay, well, thank you, Ellen. I appreciate it, and I'm happy to be here tonight. I also want to take just a moment to say that I want to recognize all the people that worked on these teams and on these committees. You know, a lot of the participants were looking forward to a summer of vacationing and, you know, going to the beach as they usually do. And the times have changed. It's been certainly a ride, but they're willing and happy to dedicate their time to working towards this reopening. So thank you very much to everybody involved in this process. It was a huge effort. I just am going to quickly review the timeline. So when our world flipped, we were talking, David, Ellen, myself, Michael Householder, a number of people, about how we certainly didn't have we shouldn't have the opportunity to sit and wait for state guidelines or guidelines from any other. We had to start working on developing a plan, and then we will adjust the plan to whatever guidelines come out. So between May 1st and May 12th, both Ellen and myself started recruiting teachers and principals and parents to be on a reopening and recovery plan committee. And I don't recall anybody saying, no, I don't want to do that. They were all stepped up to the plate and really were happy to do that. And the diversity on those teams between administrators and teachers and families, parents, was really added to the effectiveness of the teams, I believe. On May 12th, the board was reviewed the instructional policy committee, the plans that the team had come up with. Then on May 14th, the teams got together. We had an overall team, and then we broke into 8 committees or subcommittees of that team that then began meeting, many on a larger timeline than what we had even come up with. They'd meet during the week to review the areas that they were to work with as far as the guidance that they had and some of the other items that will be reviewed in this presentation. Then between May 21st and June 11th, we had additional meetings of the whole team, and then the 8 action teams that were involved. They scheduled meetings on their own. I know some of the board members actually even sat in on a few of those meetings. By June 12th, a draft was presented to Dr. James of the work that the teams had done. This was the initial draft. In just 4 days after that, again, the Instructional Policy Committee updated the board on what we came up with. And now we get to this meeting where, again, this is a draft presentation. We'll be back at a later date and to give you a final recommendations. But tonight we wanted to present all of the draft proposals and recommendations. So this is how the teams were set up. The 8 committee teams for that fell under the larger Reopen and Recovery Action Team were, as you can see, the Health Advisory Team, School Model and Instructional Recovery Team. We split that committee into 2 separate committees, both to work on the school model and then a separate committee to work on instructional recovery. The extracurricular and off-campus trips team, the athletic team, mental health and transitions, and I'll say that was both, they looked at both through the lens of both our student and our staff, mental health and transitions back to a reopening, the logistics and technology team, the family engagement team, and the state and federal funds team. These teams were all charged with the same type of thing, to review any guidelines put out by the CDC, by ODE, by the Public Health Department, the Summit County Health Department, and any other state guidelines that, and we'll continue to look at that guidance up until we adopt an actual recommendation, a model. We also looked at how other states and how other countries were reopening their schools or planning to reopen their schools. And it was a wide range of plans, as you can imagine, but we did glean some interesting things from those plans and some things that we probably would not do. And then we reviewed survey data, which was so important from our families, the community, and from students and staff, and teacher surveys, which some other people will be going over in a short time. And here are the action teams. The people, every team was chaired by both an administrator and an AEA representative, and then a number of people that were specialized in that field or were working towards the items that that particular subcommittee had to work on. Again, it was all hands on deck, and many, many people stepped up to the plate and really tackled this and dug deep and did research and reviewed guidelines from many different places. If you'll look at this slide, what we told each committee to do was to use these 6 principles as kind of guideposts or principles on looking at their reopening plans. We certainly wanted to look at college and career academies because we have that in place already. We've learned a lot about how to deliver instruction and how those impact every area of the district, and that's our pre-K through 12 transformation to college and career academies. Number 1 for every committee and for the district is also certainly the physical and social emotional well-being of not only students but the staff. That's a priority. That's an absolute priority to keep our students and staff safe, both physically and emotionally. It's been an upheaval in everybody's lives and will continue to be to a certain extent. So that's very important. And every subcommittee looked at their work through those eyes. Just as important, equity. We wanted to make sure we were addressing the needs of every student, not just our special needs student, but every student that walks through our door in a way that's equitable and addresses all of their needs. Very important is teacher educator autonomy within the classroom. Those educators in the classroom and service providers look at differentiated needs on a regular basis, always have. And we wanted to make sure that we were looking at every element within a reopening plan that would address those individual differentiated student needs and the unique needs of each student. And then a seamless transition design, which we'll address in a number of different formats later on in this presentation. But we know that COVID is a moving target, and that we can't just say this is the model we're going to open up with and we're going to stick to that no matter what. That's not going to happen. So we had to have a flexible, seamless transition to a remote model, a blended learning model, and a site-based model, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And then finally, fiscal responsibility, which Ryan and Michael are going to go into. And that was a concern with districts across the country. We have to develop a reopening model, reopening design, yet we have to make sure that the reopening model is fiscally responsible. So I'll give it back to Ellen and we can get into some of the specifics of this.
So one of the other opportunities that we have right now, as we looked at those design principles and made sure those were all there and embedded in our plans, piece that we have right now that's an opportunity is we had to make sure that the plans for next year, kept us on course, as I was saying, to the strategies outlined in our district focus. And in particular, our whole transformation of the college and career academies, pre-K through 12. So at a place where our district focus, we are at the end of the 5 years of that district focus. And this was supposed to be the spring and summer where we redesigned that district focus for the next 5 years. So even though we're saying it's rooted in our mission right now, these plans, we also wanted to be thinking forward and looking at what's to come the next 5 years in this next phase of our college and career academies across our key 3 areas, and how do we make sure we're building that into the future as well. Take a moment to dive a little bit deeper into the survey results, starting with our parents, and then we're going to go to our faculty, so that we can get kind of a deeper dive into their reflections on this past spring, and then starting to move into the fall. So Carla will take it from here.
Good evening. As Dr. McWilliams-Woods previously stated, there were several ways to engage our parents and families in providing feedback. Our survey, randomly sampled survey of our families, as well as the focus group discussions in partnership with United Way of Summit County, and other online survey tools were used to capture this data. No matter the survey process, the results were consistent across each of the methods that we used. So nearly 80% of our families state that they would send their students back to school, a physical school location. 12% not quite sure at this time, 9% preferring the remote learning for students. All interested in safety as their #1 priority. And then a third, and a third interested in online training at 31%, 30% not interested, 35% may be interested in online training, but more discussion certainly in those 3 areas could take place. An interesting statistic that came out in focus group discussions, as well as the scientific randomized sample survey, was the need for additional resources. Lots of concern about the additional supports that could be provided to both students and families as a part of our reopening and recovery plans. So 43% indicating that they indeed have concerns about child care. And within that particular concern, ensuring that there were available slots and enough of them for their students as we deal with social distancing among our child care providers. Safety concerns, the cost of child care, and then transportation, as many of our families are also working during those after-school hours. 38% talking about the need for mental health supports as a community resource. And then 30% of our families speaking to the need for food resources. And as I've emphasized many times before, basic needs are a high priority for a third of our families in our district. Dr. McWilliams-Woods?
And I think you can see that just this information on this one slide, the critical nature of it, how all of this information then fed to the 8 action teams side on their recommendations. So knowing that 79% of the families were planning on sending their students back to school based on the models that get eventually adopted here in the district, and 9% prefer remote learning, that really made a big difference in terms of how we started to structure our plans. The other major piece that Carla just mentioned, the 38% needing mental health supports, we all took that into consideration of the stressors that are on families and students right now, and making sure that we build in some of that mental health and social emotional support into our plans. Regardless of the number of days and how we have to schedule students, we still have to meet those needs. The next, I'm going to call on Sarah Leffler, one of our teachers who helped Instructional Recovery Group, and they did some teacher surveys to look at their thinking, back reflecting on the APS Connected Learning 1.0, and then their thoughts and input on where we need to head in the fall.
Thank you very much. Good evening. In Akron, we strive to ensure equitable access to quality education of all students. The educational life of every faculty member and learner drastically changed in March. I was part of a subcommittee tasked with gathering information and data on the lessons we learned from our instructional practice over the period of time from March 12th to June 4th. This slide shows some of our biggest challenges that teachers showed working at home. We'll notice that 70% of teachers said that connecting with students was a major concern, especially the difficulty that students had with using email. Next was communicating with parents, and then grading concerns, distractions of students, technical issues, and connectivity. We also will notice that the top 3 tools that teachers use for connected learning were Google Classroom, Google Meets, and our district adopted online curriculum. Useful supports that teachers reported using were communicating with colleagues, online resources in our toolkits, building leadership, and our district supports. On our next slide, we're going to notice that teachers said that they had a very easy time navigating Google Classroom. However, when we start to look at the students, they have a somewhat easy time navigating Google Classroom, while parents start to show a more difficult time navigating the Google Classroom. And on the next slide, the number one thing that the big takeaway from both the teacher and the principal surveys was that the number one concern for everybody is the safety of our students and our faculty. The next thing that came from our data was that it was important to prioritize face-to-face and maximize our instructional time for our youngest learners and our academically challenged students. And then our third takeaway was utilizing a hybrid model or online instruction for our older students and for our students that are academically more successful. So those were our biggest takeaways from that data.
So as we look at the results from the teacher and principal survey and the parent survey, it starts to kind of lead us down a path towards what types of health principles are we going to need, and then what school models, and then all the other kind of teams of extracurricular and mental health supports follow after that. Kind of placed our health advisory team in sort of the prominent place because the principles that we had to follow for what our teachers and principals were saying was so important around safety drive the model and drive all of our decisions about how we keep our children safe and our staff safe. And when you think about it, we're not only talking about the people that are coming into our building, we're also talking about when children go home for their parents and their family and their grandparents, and the same thing with our staff when they go home. So we're going to start to go through our 8 action teams, and they're going to each present their recommendations to you. We are starting with our health advisory team that Deborah led with a teacher team. Sarah Leffler supported that team as well as our dear friends from the Summit County Health Department that are here with us today to help present. Over to you.
Good evening. It's nice to see you all, and I would like to introduce to you Tanya Borford. She is the Environmental Health Director for Summit County. She is attending the meeting with Sarah and I this evening. As Dr. Ellen McWilliams-Woods has stated, along with the superintendent, we felt it was very important to make sure that the Health Advisory Committee was aware of the CDC guidance that is listed on the particular school opening items. And as you can see in the slide that is now presented, we have 3 areas on this slide that was a very important part to our professional development discussion with Summit County, Akron Children's Hospital, Asia Inc., as well as our in-house team. The first thing you always have to do is be ready to deal with somebody that truly is possibly COVID positive. We have to be able to assess that risk, and we need to be able to address it as soon as possible. So we've put plans into place to have our clinics looked at, to start down that road to meet those needs as we plan to open school. We also have to realize that we could be very fortunate that maybe the spread in the Akron area and in our families may lessen, and we need to plan appropriately for that, which you see in the lower part of the left corner. But to be honest with you, I think at this point, Tanya and I would advise, along with our health committee, that Akron is in the lower right corner, which is minimal to moderate or substantial community spread. So therefore, because we know we need those items to be addressed, we are going to continue to honestly take our plans, no matter what they are, and have them focused on the health and safety of our students and our staff. We're going to be reaching out to Tanya and her staff to review our plans. In fact, to be honest with you, Tanya and I are probably hooked at the shoulder at this point because they've been very, very fortunate in getting us through our 9 live graduation plans. They are currently working with us on phase 3 of our athletic returns, and have taught us a number of areas that we can look at with our children's hospital staff as we realign our clinics and then look to PPE and other optimization of those particular plans. Going to the next slide, these are the planning and recommendations that we felt you should hear from us tonight. Based on what may come from the governor's office, through the Ohio Department of Ed, along with the CDC and our internal Summit County team, we are currently recommending that we will have 6 feet of social distance at all times, which does result in less students per classroom. Currently, we think we can get to a 50% capacity on a school bus, but I'll explain a little bit more about that. We are looking at PPE for students and staff, and we have a variety of different types that we have looked at, and we have costed those out depending on the number of students, based on approximately 21,000 students, as well as 4,500 staff members for Mr. Pendleton and the finance staff. We are looking at health assessments, which includes taking of temperatures throughout what we'll call the school day, from the beginning through the school day and at the end, and to deal with students and staff for either, if they are symptomatic at a bus stop all the way through, could they have an issue at school? Could they have an issue at a large group event? We are increasing the sanitation requirements throughout the school when these sessions are in for people to be in our facilities, whether they are honestly our students and staff, or actually eventually when we open these back up to City of Akron use and the community. These include bathrooms, water fountains, and high touch areas. And currently Tanya and their team is recommending that these be done every 2 hours. So we will be making adjustments to our custodial staff. We are still not sure about large group gatherings. The current limits are no more than 10 to a confined space, with 50 in areas with proper social distancing, such as what we've done with athletics and the marching bands. This may change, and so therefore we have to be able to be honestly flexible, as Pat had said earlier, because we could be on a rotating cycle depending on what the disease does. Tanya may have some comments she would like to share with us. Tanya, do you have anything regarding these particular advisories at this time?
Good evening. The only thing I would like to say is it's been my pleasure working with Deb and her team. We have been rather attached at the hip just because there's been a lot of moving parts, but it's definitely something that we're happy to do. Akron Public is a very large school district with lots of considerations. And really what we're waiting for at this point, as the superintendent mentioned earlier, is that guidance that's going to come from the state. We do know that when we get that guidance, it's going to be broad guidance. So they've done that intentionally so that school districts can adapt and make sure that they can make recommendations and policies that fit their individual needs. So that's kind of where we've come in as the health district, being able to help you walk that a little bit and sort of figure out which things are the most important. And I think Deb and the team have done a great job of identifying these 6 things. These are the big ones, and there are always going to be other questions that we have to address along the way.
Thank you. Now I'd like you to understand the spacing of a school bus, because this was vitally important and has been a large topic, not only within Akron, but also a number of school districts throughout the state. On the slide, I gave you a 66 passenger bus, and we normally transport close to 66 students on a bus. There are usually 3 to a seat, no matter where they are at K level, all the way up to 8th grade on athletic trips, etc. If we social distance to 1 student to a seat, therefore we would get no more than approximately 22 students to a bus, which is 1/3 of the capacity we're used to having. Then I want you to look at the second part of the slide. If we had to social distance to the best of our ability, and on a bus you can't get to 6 feet, but we can get approximately 5, then that's where you will see the different colors. The students are in green and the red are unused. That gets us down to 11 students to a bus, which really does make it difficult for proper transport, no matter how good we are at making sure our students are temped before they get on a bus, that they may have to wear a mask depending on the guidelines. We would have difficulty making that transition to that low a capacity. We also shared with you, because many of our high school students are riding Metro buses to school as part of our contract with the Metro Regional Transit Authority, that currently they are allowed to be at a 50% capacity, which they worked with Tanya and her team to develop and have increased it recently. That allows them for only 25 people on a bus, but you must be masked. If you are standing at a bus stop for Metro and do not have a mask on, you are not allowed to enter the bus. So whatever capacity we're allowed to have and whatever guidelines are put into place, we have some training to do for our families, training to do for our students, and training to do for our staff. because we want to make sure that these buses are not only safe to travel, but they also are safe related to the disease that we're currently encompassing and trying to address. The next slide shows you an actual classroom. And as you look at the slide, our 900 feet classroom space currently houses approximately 25 students, which you can see there along with their teacher and some computers in the background. To meet the 6 feet socially distanced around those students now limits us to approximately 11 students. I might get 12 because recently we took out that back corner where you see the computer tables now that everybody is one-to-one devices. But again, if you have a class that has 25 students and I now can only have half of that amount, now where do you put the other students and the teachers that need to help do their educational during the day? So we've been looking at those capacity rates at each building. And we know that we have some buildings that we will have to adjust and some buildings that will be in large group space areas trying to meet the needs of our students as we try to lay out the classrooms. The next issue, and I'm going to ask Tanya to kind of help me with this one, we want to show you why it's important to recommend that personal face coverings for students and staff be used unless there's a medical exception. And we were fortunate enough to get this slide from Tanya and her team.
So you may be hearing a little bit from when the governor speaks about mask usage. We feel just anecdotally from our inspectors being out in the field that we have anywhere from 10 to 25% of the population wearing masks while they're indoors. We know from CDC guidance that this is not enough to stop the flow of disease. You have to have about 80% of people wearing masks indoors in order to have any kind of protection from COVID-19. And you may be hearing sometimes that the mask doesn't protect the wearer. And in this scenario, this graphic, it kind of shows exactly what we're talking about here. Cloth face coverings are not medical grade PPE. They're not an N95 mask. An N95 is meant to restrict the airflow of breathe in and out. Cloth face coverings, really what they do, and if you look at the yellow one there, it keeps in droplets. So whenever we speak or cough or sneeze, we throw out tiny microscopic droplets. And if we can prevent those from going into the air, then that's what actually prevents the spread of disease. There really is no more effective way, easy way really, to prevent COVID-19 spread than wearing a mask and socially distancing together. That's why you see in the graphic, the green, where it shows that 6 feet apart with a mask. And that's where we kind of get that 80% if people wear them correctly. So that's the other issue. So, you know, we have to do a lot of education around how to wear a mask when it's appropriate, and also to make sure that you have the social distancing as well. A lot of questions, I'll bring this up now, about if a shield replaces a mask, and the answer is it does not. And it's a little bit because of that droplet throwing I talked about a minute ago. The shield actually, it will protect the wearer a bit from getting droplets, but it's not going to protect them from kind of entering open air because it's not as tight on the face as a cloth face covering is.
Thank you, Tanya. So therefore, we have taken the opportunity to identify the cost per student for different types of face coverings at this point. I will share with you, we've been very fortunate in working with the GAR Foundation as well as Goodwill. They have been supplying to the district. We're up to about 15,000 masks we've been handing out to families during the meal program over the recent weeks, and we have currently asked them if they're willing to work with us again to adjust the size for smaller students. And we are hopefully looking at possibly another 10,000 that we would be able to give away. So we're trying to support our particular families that would not necessarily have easy access to these products, even though we would still plan on housing masks if they're required in whatever manner to supply them through our school district to our students and staff. Thank you.
So when we take into consideration these health principles, obviously the key ones for any planning moving forward is the 6 feet social distancing, that automatically takes our typical standard classrooms and basically cuts them in half. Same thing with transportation. Now we can only transport half the kids on one route versus the 66 kids, up to 66 kids. And even going down to 22, that's even a third of the kids on that route. So those 2 pieces. And then not having large gatherings. So you think about what happens typically in a school day for cafeteria time and the gym space, and even just coming in and out of school. And that, you can easily have more than 10 kids in the hallway at the same time. You think middle school and high school, how they pass in the hallway. All of those considerations, we had to then filter down into the different action teams and start to say that if we followed all of these safety guidelines, that obviously we have to, for the sake of our children and our staff and the family members at home. Now let's figure out a plan to put all of those into place. We're going to start with our instructional recovery team, taking those health principles and saying, how do we look instructionally at our students and figure out what they've lost in the spring, and then what can or gained or accelerated in the spring during our APS Connected Learning 1.0. What can we do during the summer and next year to make sure we close any gaps and take advantage of any of the acceleration that happened with students from the spring heading into the fall. I'm going to turn it over to Karen Jijic, who's going to lead this part.
Thank you. And I also am going to invite Sarah Leffler to join me for this. So this subgroup, Instructional Recovery, was co-chaired by Dawn Blakeney and Christine Milsatich. They are not able to join us tonight, but Sarah is here to bring the strong teacher voice. And this Instructional Recovery Subcommittee relied heavily on the survey data that you saw and heard earlier in this presentation. They relied on teacher voices because the teacher practitioners are those who were able to quickly pivot and make the change in March to go to a connected learning delivery. So I'm going to invite Sarah to share those teacher-voiced recommendations with you now.
Thank you, Mrs. Jijic. Our number 1 recommendation was to expand our summer programming to help students recover any content that they might have lost from March 12th on. Our second recommendation is to provide training and videos for Connected Learning 2.0 and blended learning as we move forward. We saw in the data that a lot of teachers and students had questions, and parents had questions about using some of the technology. And we wanted to make sure that there were videos and training available for those that needed that training to help them navigate whatever is coming in the future. The third recommendation is to create a portal for promising practices that we learned from Connected Learning 1.0. We had a lot of good things come out of 1.0, as Dr. McWilliams-Woods stated earlier, and we wanted to be able to capture those so that we could reuse the things that we did well in the spring, and if we need to, use them again in the fall. The fourth recommendation is going to come once we have more guidance from the governor and ODE that we may have to reconvene to provide more guidance to fine arts, our essential experiences in the fall, our experiential learning days, and our world languages. And our final piece, our final recommendation is to identify assessments, to identify the strengths and or gaps, regardless of the school model that we have in the fall, to help students and to help move our curriculum forward. Our next slide is going to talk about one of those a little bit more in depthly. This was our keeping kids connected throughout the summer. This plan was talked about at the last board meeting by Ms. Otley Kelly and Mr. Black, but this showed our recommendation for expanding our summer program for our intensive kids that needed extra help throughout the summer. And our next slide is going to go a little bit more in depth about a recommendation that we are making for what we would like to have happen to gauge where the students are where we return in the fall. It is important to the teachers to see the performance levels of students from March 12th to where they are in the fall. The committee recommended using assessments and resources that we already have available to us. And you can see at the elementary level, that includes using iReady, that includes using the oral reading record, writing samples. At the middle school, that includes using exact path and writing samples. At the high school level, that includes using teacher-generated readiness tools for both math and ELA, and writing samples and content pre-assessments. So that would be the recommendations from the Instructional Recovery Committee.
So now we're going to transition to our third action team. And this one, Pat Shipe and I co-chaired this team, and this was for the school models. And obviously this was critical for us to take those health advisory guidelines, look at what the instructional recovery plan needed to be, and then figure out how can we bring students in, knowing that we can only have, it's approximately 12 students per classroom, with maintaining that social distance, and we can only have half the students, at least we believe right now, coming in via transportation. So how can we accommodate the school models, knowing that we need to keep things moving forward? So Pat is going to kick us off on outlining each of the school models as we go through preschool, elementary, middle, and high.
Thank you, Ellen. So I spoke about, and a number of other people have already spoke about, how the need for flexibility as we move forward is there. It's just by nature of the COVID that we may be, and how it impacts our community, that we may have to be very flexible across a district from building to building even, with what model may be implemented at any given time. So the first of the three flexible models for reopening the schools, number one would be 100% remote learning. That would be a model that we've already gone through in the spring, and in March, that's the model we implemented, where we used APS connected learning, and our students would work 5 days a week from home, doing all their learning remotely. This could be certainly, if something happens, implemented across the district, or it can be implemented within any particular building at any given moment. The second model would be a blended learning model, which would include some time working remotely, the students working remotely, and then other times during the week or the day working in a site-based atmosphere. This would be 5 days a week, for instance, 2 site-based days and 3 remote days. Also implementing with all these models, but particularly the blended learning, the social distancing, and that impacts both our transportation and in the buildings, when the students are in the buildings or when the staff are in the building. That social distancing has to be implemented. And then the last model would be 100% site-based learning. I think Deb touched on that a little bit. We don't really anticipate that happening, but there's certainly a model where we would return all students 100% to the classroom on site-based learning, and have traditional class sizes. Or if they're 5 days a week within the blended learning model, we'd certainly implement the social distancing.
So when you look at those three kind of overarching choices in terms of how we can educate, we wanted to make sure that everyone knew that that regardless of the model, there's really 3 considerations that go into effect here in our recommendations. The first thing is family choice and being able to, we know that because of this 7-year rich history that we have with technology, 15-year history with running our own online school and program, we know that every family, we can offer, if a family wants to have their student remain remote, similar to what we just did this past spring, and they want to stay 100% remote, and it would be APS Connected Learning 2.0, so it would be enhanced. Some of the would be delivered would shift a little bit, but the families have that sense right now of what that looks like. So that's, all families could choose that for their child if that's their comfort level and that's the way they want to continue, and we'll provide that. Or families can choose one of the models that we're going to present to you based on the grade band. So all families will have that choice. Second thing is we are looking for students with more severe disabilities. And remember, this came out in the teacher and faculty survey, to really make sure we're prioritizing face-to-face, site-based time with students with the most significant disabilities and our youngest students. So we are saying that our students with severe disabilities, we make sure that they're in school every day. They're already social distanced because they're less than 12 students per class. So we can accommodate that. And we'll have to figure out transportation will be the biggest challenge, but we're going to do everything we can to make sure they're able to come in on a more regular basis throughout the week in a more traditional way. Other students with disabilities will be able to follow the school model. Students with more mild to moderate disabilities, they can follow the same models that we're proposing for all students, but then work with their IEP teams to make sure their needs are adjusted and met. And then the third thing is the start and end times. We will announce those once we get the guidelines from the state, because the key, when you saw the visual with the transportation, we're going to have to look at how the final guidelines come in, and then look to see if we need to make any adjustments in our start and end time of schools based on all the very different routing that we're going to have to do. So I'm going to start with preschool and show you the recommendation that we're making tonight for how preschool will open. This actually is almost identical. And remember, we were trying to prioritize our youngest children who based on the parent surveys and the faculty survey are really the least able to kind of be autonomous, working at a computer to do their remote learning. And they need lots and lots of parental support. So for preschool, we're recommending that the students come in 5 days per week for half a day, which is what they already do now. So this is a traditional schedule for them. It will be on-site, site-based learning. We will need to reduce the class sizes though, and that's based on the state preschool guidelines that it has to be 9 or below versus the typical 12 that they have in the classroom now. So we'll need to reduce the class size. And so we'll continue morning and afternoon. We're recommending shaving a few minutes off the morning and afternoon session to make sure we have a good amount of time to do a full cleaning between the morning session and the afternoon session for the next group of students who come in. And you will see on every model slide at the bottom, it says, note, all families will have an option to continue 100% online through APS Connected Learning 2.0. So they can continue that remote learning if they choose to. Pat's going to review the elementary.
So we looked at, again, looking at our youngest students, we looked at what it would look like, a model that we are recommending tonight for our kindergarten, first and second grade students. And that would put them in the buildings 100% of the time, 5 days a week in the buildings. Each teacher would be assigned no more than 24 students. And of those 24 students, they would be broken down into 2 classrooms of no more than 12 students each, which would allow us to do the social distancing. So K through 2, 24 students to a teacher, and those 24 students would be divided into 2 classrooms of no more than 12 each. That would mean that during a half of the day, they would be getting their reading and math core instruction with their teacher. So that one of those 2 classrooms would be getting core instruction with their teacher in reading and math. The other half of those students would be getting their art, music, PE, library time, any interventions or enrichment support that they would need, that would be in the other classroom. Then in the afternoon, the classroom that had their core instruction in the morning would get those enrichment and interventions, and the class that had the enrichment and interventions in the morning would then be getting their core instruction in the afternoon. And again, that's for K through 2. Now with our 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, we would be looking at a blended learning model in which they would be in school on the site based 2 days per week, and then 3 days per week using remote learning at home. Again, that would be 24 or less students per teacher, and half of them would attend, or 12 students per teacher would attend the 2 days of site-based learning, and then another 2 days would be the other half of that classroom attending. This would allow them to do remote lessons on the 3 days a week that include lessons or any virtual activities, remote essential learning experiences with our community partners. So that would be for 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade students, 2 days site-based and 3 days remote learning per week.
And then for the middle school, this is a blended learning approach, very similar to the 3-5. And again, this is all because we have to follow those social distancing principles, that we can only have half the students in at a time. We have to take every classroom and split it down in half. So we would have students would come in for 2 days per week for site-based learning, and then 3 days would be remote. 4 to 30 students per teacher, depending on the size of the classes, but most likely would be around that 12 to 15 students per classroom based on that 6 feet of social distancing. Half of the students attend 2 days, then the other half attend the next 2 days. What would happen during that 3-day kind of blended learning time, it would include those extended lessons from the teacher to do that they assign during the 2 days to do remotely, virtual activities, remote experiences with community partners that we'll build. And we're already in deep discussion with our community partners about providing some virtual activities and lessons with our students. For social emotional support, mentoring and intervention and enrichment, because this is a blended model, there may be times that we can have students come in at least 1 day a week to be able to have some counseling if they need that, some activities and clubs and activities. So we will be looking to, based on the guidelines, once the state issues those, whether we'll be able to continue that on during those remote days. And again, just like we've said on every single slide, the families still have the option to do 100% online through APS Connected Learning 2.0. When you go up to the high school level, this is a blended learning model that we're recommending, but it has a shift to it. We use the terms project-based blended learning by academy. And so if you remember when we talked at the beginning, we have to make sure that our college and career academy work stays on track. most important shift that we've been making in our high schools, and then all the planning and design for our middle schools and for our elementary, is to get students engaged more in projects and more collaboration, more discussion groups, instead of kind of sitting and listening and in a more passive kind of learning. We want students to own their learning. So because of high school, that we don't have the barriers for transportation as much for high school as we do for K-8, it gave us some flexibility that we could keep students using APS Connected Learning 2.0. So that would be the foundation of their instruction. The teachers and students within an academy, they would map out when students come in based on their projects, their capstone projects, their career-ed lab courses, their science labs. Instead of having it an automatic that everybody is scheduled at a specific time every single day or 2 days a week, it'll be chunked out on a calendar where the teachers in the academy will determine when students come in based on these projects. And there'll be posted calendars for like a 2 to 4 week kind of time period where students will know when they need to come in. But their foundation will be the APS Connected Learning 2.0. I listed the other activities under details, the projects, career tech labs, college and career experiences, extracurricular, capstone projects, social emotional support. All of that will be when students come in. Now, obviously, as we've had to preface everything, we have to look at the guidelines once they come from the state. We have to see what our risk factor is based on our community spread in the city of Akron. And then we have to work with the Summit County Department of Public Health to be able to make sure that we get every single plan approved once the detail is flushed out. Again, for the high school, they also could choose 100% online and not have this coming into school for projects if the families so choose. So I'm going to pause just for a second on this last high school slide before we look at the financial impact. So we've stepped you through the recommendations for the school models for preschool and K2, and you heard at the beginning, we were talking about the kind of principles and priorities and all of the data from our teachers, and that's K-12 data. They all said, be sure you're putting the most seat time and the most site-based time for our youngest learners who are the least able to learn remotely, which is what we've satisfied and done. For preschool and for K2 and for our students with significant disabilities, we've really been able to accommodate them. When you think about what it means for K2, I'm anticipating the questions that you're going to have, because what Pat described was you're taking one class in K2 of 24 students and you're splitting them into 2 classrooms. We have done the study and the research, and we have examined every single building and every single cluster. Are confident that we can accommodate the K2 by splitting the classrooms in half. We're going to have to use every inch of every building. There are a couple clusters that we may need to look at some alternative additional space in. But we looked at every single school, every elementary school in the city, and we believe that we can make the accommodation in nearly every school to be able to have the students in that K2. And then obviously the North Hill cluster, we need to look at some additional space to be able to accommodate K2, basically doubling their footprint in every school. Now we're going to pause on the school model, and we're going to move to our state and federal funding team. Ryan Pendleton and Michael Householder, who's the vice president of AEA, they co-chaired the finance team, who is looking at all of these models and looking at impact and looking at the health advisory information that you've heard and the instructional recovery information and has put some funding figures high level together and some additional recommendations.
Thank you. Thanks for that transition. While a motorcycle runs by my window, sorry about that. Sorry about the noise. So while this is fresh in your mind about the school models, we wanted to respond in a practical impact. What are the practical financial implications of this new normal? So before I do that, a special thanks to Michael Householder in chairing this committee, as well as the committee members, as well as the operations team, finance, student services, custodial maintenance, business affairs, and transportation, really detailing this. Not only this, I know it's high level on this page, but I do want to walk you through some of these numbers to give you the sense that this really is practical application. There is an asterisk down at the bottom of this first slide, and that asterisk is this assumes that all 21,000 of our students are in seat full-time. So that's why we want you to know this is practical. This is very conservative. Will it be this much? Likely not. But I also think this is a very reasonable set of circumstances and numbers to present. And so while you're scanning those numbers, I want to let you know what some of them represent and the kinds of items that we're looking at before I turn it over to Michael on the next slide. We're talking about hand sanitizer for students and staff, PPE face shields, disinfectant wipes, disinfectant backpack sprayers, additional staff time and custodial cleaning to go through the buildings during our breaks that fit in the intermittent components of our return to school plan to do deep cleaning midweek and on the weekends. Additional data plan and hotspots, additional Chromebooks and our repair of Chromebooks. Obviously, this is going to be a lot of virtual repair and on-site, kind of how we did food delivery and those kind of things. Additional bus assistance to make sure that a student's daily transportation from their front door to ours starts with safety in mind. Masks for all of our transportation drivers, van drivers, full-time bus drivers, and additional cleaning materials for in between those runs where we have to apply that disinfectant to seats. And then the additional funds, as you're looking down through that, we need to be very careful, make sure, and Michael's going to talk about this slide next, how we framed these expenses, meaning what is our overall goal? What is our overall purpose with this committee? And then ultimately, our committee's not going to stop. We want to come back together after the board adopts the return to school plan and the governor gives us additional guidance to update the forecast and the board about the final model. And with that, I'll turn it over to Michael.
Well, thank you, Ryan. At the time that we started meeting for the State and Federal Funds Financial Committee, there was no reopening plan or model whatsoever. So we decided to concentrate on the effects of the current state budget reduction we face and the spending related to the CARES Act funding, with the intention of removing as much as possible the financial stress from the federal fund. The main goal of the committee has been and will continue to be to protect programming and its staff as much as possible. Also, we have been and will continue to work with the Ohio Department of Education in order to apply as much flexibility as possible to the district's federal grant spending and to the CARES Act funding we received. The committee has agreed to come back together in the next few weeks and review the updated forecast in regards to spending from March 13 to the end of the year. Once a specific plan or model is chosen, the committee will reconvene to discuss, to update and review the financial impact and financial implications of the model that is chosen by the Board of Education. And I guess I turn it back to Ryan.
Yeah, I think, Ryan, unless you have some final remarks, we'll go ahead and go. Obviously, the finance component of this is going to be a moving target until we get the final plans from the governor. And we've said that multiple times. We thought it was going to come about 3 weeks ago, and then 2 weeks ago, and a week ago. And I think it's for good reason. I think they're making some adjustments to be more flexible by county and by city. So I do think the wait has been worth it, and hopefully it'll be here this week. 5 more teams. These were the biggest ones you've just heard from in terms of the health advisory and the instructional recovery and the school model, which was one team kind of split into 2 groups. Now we, in our finance, now we're going to go to athletics, who they have been doing a tremendous amount of work mapping out, because the athletic summer training already started. So I'll turn it over to Mark Black and Christopher Hayes.
Good evening. At this time, I want to introduce Joe Vasilati and Marcus Hayes. They did a great job of getting us rolling with athletics, because we had to start June 15th. So we are kind of in process, and we want to thank folk as well as the Summit County Health Department for approving our plans to get our students back into athletics, as some of them were isolated for so long they didn't know what it was like to run again. So we're glad that they're all able to do that. So Joe, if you could talk about Ohio High School Athletic Association.
Sure will, Mark. Thank you. Hope everyone's doing well. So we've been working together, as everyone has, for the past 5 to 6 weeks. And I want to thank Mark and Ron Linger and Marcus Hayes, who are on here with me as well. First of all, in terms of athletics reopening, we're following the National Federation of High School guidelines and the OHSA guidelines, taking those into serious consideration when we make our recommendations. So in terms of the athletic restart and our teams getting active again, and hopefully in preparation for games this fall, but of course all that's still up in the air. But we have begun workouts according to these guidelines and working closely with the Summit County Health Department as well. So I want to thank Tanya for that. We also have, in addition to our teams being active through what we hope is phase 3 coming up, and gradually getting more kids involved and the groups getting a little larger while practicing, safety guidelines and protocols, such as a check-in station for their workouts where they self-report symptoms, where their sanitation supply is readily available, and so forth. We've been working indoors and outdoors according with the grouping guidelines suggested by the Summit County Health Department. But in addition to that, our athletic reopening team has taken on the issue of eligibility too. And what might that look like in the fall? The OHSAA has suggested all students be eligible based on marking period 4, and how that type of learning varied from district to district throughout the state and the online learning that took place. Of course, individual districts have the ability to establish minimum GPA requirements and credit requirements, but the OHSAA has waived their traditional 5-credit requirement for eligibility for high school sports for grades 7 through 12 in the fall. So we have a team that has made recommendations, and the board will see that. They've recommended that we take those OHSAA guidelines into consideration, but also possibly establish our own policies for mandatory study tables below certain GPAs. In our traditional policy in APS, it's student athletes between a 1.4 and a 2.0 would attend study tables. In addition to that, our committee is recommending study tables for students below 1.4, and if they attend and keep their grades up through marking period 1, they would maintain eligibility. We also had 2 other task force in our athletic reopening committee. One introduced East special education teacher and athletic director and head football coach. He does it all, Marcus Hayes. He led a committee that's going to look at NCAA eligibility and the transition of our high school seniors to become NCAA eligible. So Coach Hayes, it's all yours.
Okay. Well, looking at the NCAA requirements throughout this virus, what they have told us is that understanding that the magnitude of what's happening, they have decided to waive the SAT and ACT requirements for student athletes that are incoming freshmen for the 2019-2020 for the fall session. With that also, ultimately what they are doing, they are waiving a student athlete's senior year from this past year. You needed to meet 10 core course requirements, which are your science, your math, your histories, and your language arts classes. So you needed to have those 10 completed before your 7th semester. And with that being said, if you are a student athlete in Akron Public Schools or anywhere else that was awarded a Division I scholarship, then you needed to have at least a 2.3 core GPA. If you are going to a Division II school, you needed to have a 2.2 core GPA. And if you are even going to an association like the NAIA, which is the National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics, they said that you needed only to have a 2.0 GPA, not a 2.0 core, but just a 2.0 overall. So I know the next biggest thing is going to be looking at what is the 2021 fall athletes going to look like, and what is the NCAA going to do to possibly help those student athletes also, because since testing centers are not open yet, but that is still up in the air right now, and we're going to still keep our ear to what they're going to put out about that also.
Thank you, Coach Hayes. Our last item in athletics reopening involved the usage of our CLCs by clubs and non-APS athletic groups. And leading that committee was Ron Linger. So I'll turn it over to Ron at this point to address the CLC usage.
Thanks, Coach. I appreciate having me on the committee. First of all, I'd like to thank some of our committee members. Larry Chambers, one of our great coaches at Ennis, and we had a tremendous parent, Lauren Prosciutti, also that helped us with that. Also, a special shout out to the Business Affairs Office and Jennifer King, who helped provide most of the documentation for our particular end of the document. Basically, all of the CLC usage will have to follow the CDC and the Department of Health guidelines as we would for all of our school activities. We have included a symptom checklist, some cleaning and disinfecting guidelines. Certainly the rental agreements and handbooks and permits will also are provided on our document. And the symptom checklist, as we said, most importantly, we did find that there should be at least a minimum of 2 hours in between usages at multiple use facilities, so that our staff has time to properly sanitize and clean in between those clubs that want to use our facilities. Basically, that's it for us.
Well, thank you, incredible team. And thank you, Coach Hayes, Marcus Hayes, for being a part of this team too. This team has actually been working way earlier than the rest of the teams came together, because there was so much to accommodate both for spring and summer training and then moving into the fall. So thank you very much. We're going to move to the extracurricular team, and I'll call on Megan Mannion to start off with this team.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for allowing us to present. And I want to thank the Deb Folks team, the health, the work that the health team did, as well as the athletic committee that they also did. Our team is the extracurricular team and off-site field trips. So some of the work that you'll see in our plan that Tina Daniels, who is a 7th grade science teacher at Ennis, is going to present, actually was a combination of looking at all the work that has already been done prior to us even beginning. So Tina?
All right, thank you. So our team, which was a great team, we came up with at least most of the extracurricular or off-campus activities that took place. So we looked at elementary, middle, and high school, and we tried to compile a list, so a master database to look at these extracurriculars. What we did was we looked at the health guidance and had that determine, can these extracurriculars, off-campus activities continue to take place? If they can take place, can it be face-to-face? Does it need to be remote? Or is it possible that we cannot do them any longer? We know that there's more work for us to do to establish whether this can happen or not. And we hope to get this done well before August 14th. We know we need to look at universal procedures, open house, report card interim pickups, Title I family engagement events, any of the activities that the students are involved in, May Festival, things like that, if they would be something that can continue to take place. We also looked at or talked about the supplemental language that we have, that many of the staff have those extracurriculars with the kids, and what that would look like with a blended type of environment. And we also talked about revising the district's forms and or handbooks with activities that might have to take place or usually take place at school, and that, how that's going to look and what changes might need to be implemented for that to happen. So I did that really quickly.
That's great. This whole area is an enormous area. You can't imagine how much extracurricular and off-site trips that we take. So just having that whole massive kind of checklist is amazing to be able to start to work through so that we can give all the guidance for the fall. So thank you. Turn it over to Carla Chapman. This is our 6th action team on family engagement.
So back to our work with family engagement. I want to thank my co-chairs, Janelle Brown, elementary teacher, and Carla Bishop White, elementary counselor, who also supported the work on this team and provided guidance. This group decided that we needed to deploy a district-wide communication plan that keeps families informed throughout the summer and the school year. And this really spoke to the need for consistent information across a grade level, a school division, all elementary parents needing to receive the same information, regardless of which school they attend, all middle school and high school families receiving the same information, so that we have a consistent level of communication across our district for all families. We already spoke to the interest among families in terms of virtual training on remote learning tools. So we want to utilize the resources that we have in place within our district among our staff, our teachers, and other support personnel to provide training on remote learning tools. We spoke very heavily to the use of a central point of contact for family engagement in schools. You all know that we piloted this concept of the connector role during our 51 days of remote learning and learned a lot from that particular pilot in terms of how outreach with families can look during this remote learning time. And then very strong opinions and support for the continuation and expansion of family resource centers, moving them to different and additional clusters throughout our district. And finally, the linkage to community resources, including the child care we previously spoke about, out of school time and extended learning opportunities for working families, and also as a measure of safety for young people who we don't want to have time alone at home without the supervision and support they may need due to a family's work schedule. That's it for me.
And if you remember back to the surveys that we talked about at the beginning, the lessons learned, mental health needs of students and families came out both from the family and faculty. So we created a separate team on mental health and how are we going to do transitions into this new school year. He is going to lead this work.
Good evening, everyone. Unfortunately, my co-chairs were unable to join us this evening. Brian Hill, who's a school psychologist, and Shanika Rogers, a school counselor, but they have both been instrumental in leading this very dedicated team for what you've already heard about today is very important part of our work for mental health and transitions. So our mental health and transitions team has created 4 recommendations that have been identified to ensure that we can recognize, address, and support the mental health needs of not only just our students, but also our staff and our families as related to COVID-19. Detailed procedures and resources will be provided to all APS staff and school teams for each of the 4 areas below. Our first recommendation is to provide a district resource about COVID-19, its implications, symptoms, precautions, CDC guidelines for staff and for families that can be used at all schools to ensure that we provide a consistent and accurate message that is delivered throughout the district. Second recommendation is to implement strategies to support the mental health needs of students, staff, and families. This might include, for example, a mental health screener that is provided to all students when they return to school, training for the staff so that they can recognize and support mental health needs. And that would also include principals being trained on how to support the mental health needs of our teachers and staff in our buildings, and collaboration with school-based mental health partners such as Minority Behavior Health and Red Oak. Our third recommendation is to ensure wraparound supports for our most fragile students. So those would be students who have been identified with risk factors. This might include connecting them with community resources and other partners so that parents can have those supports, but then that would be followed by strong communication between school and home in order to help us support the students in all environments. And finally, we do want to identify strategies for transitions into kindergarten, 6th grade, 7th grade for the East Cluster, and 9th grade, recognizing that students had their year cut short and didn't get to have those farewells. We would consider a virtual farewell, perhaps from the previous building of attendance, and then traditional orientations at new buildings and or virtual tours of the new building and opportunities to meet the staff, whether that's in person or virtually. So we've heard repeatedly, as I said in the beginning, this is a very important area. Parents are concerned, staff members are concerned, principals are concerned. So there's many details and resources that will be embedded within each one of these strategies so that we can truly be prepared for next steps when students return in the fall.
Thank you, Tammy. And our final action team, after you look at all the other 7 and we all say, here's our recommendations, you have to have an incredible logistics and technology team that can take all of those brilliant ideas and actually put them into motion. Unfortunately, we have Howard Lawson and Deborah Folk who helped lead this as well with a whole team of staff, including Bruce Brown as a teacher and George Nanisto. So Howard, I will turn it over to you to start.
And unfortunately, neither George or Bruce were able to make it this evening because they had prior commitments. And so I'll take it upon myself to try and give you a synopsis of our work. And really, like the finance department, our work's really going to begin once we get the guidance from the governor and the local Summit County Health Department, once all that is kind of massaged. Initially, our APS bus transportation will require changes in routing to accommodate the reduced children on the bus. In addition, we have to accommodate the cleaning regiment and the health checkpoints for students prior to even getting on the bus, and how we're going to work through that. Our safety provisions for children, we have to take under consideration that are walking to school. We need to make sure that our crossing guards have personal protective equipment, and all the other staff that will greet them once they enter the building or exit the building during the day will need those PPEs also. Child nutrition will have to turn around and will need to shift their meal service to grab and go for in-class students. And in addition, to figure out a way to provide meals for our 100% remote learners who will not be coming to school. And all that is compounded by the need to follow the US DOE reimbursement guidelines for meeting the new child nutrition requirements. And that staff will also need to have personal protective equipment to work through those new challenges. We'll have to take a new look at our classrooms because of the new configurations to make sure that we meet the social distancing requirements. The design must maximize space utilization, and we will need to set up those classrooms with age-appropriate materials as we redefine their use for next year. Technology supports need to facilitate the computer distribution for our new students and the repairs for our returning students, especially those that are 100% remote, blended learning, or site-based learning students. We need to make sure that these devices are working each and every day for them, so that we're trying to set up some type of single source self-help procedures to quickly repair those devices to address family concerns. Additionally, attention needs to be given to assure that all families have secure internet at home. And again, our work will really begin once we get finalized plans from the governor and how to implement those from the Summit County Health Department. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. And that was a perfect segue into our closing remarks before I turn it over to Pat Shipe to have her closing remarks. Our next steps, taking all of these recommendations from these 8 teams now, we decided to just bring you the recommendations based on what we know today. But we're hearing that by July 1st, the governor and the Ohio Department of Ed will release their restart guidance. Those will come in 2 separate documents, which then we will reconvene. Not all 140 members of our large reopening and recovery team, but our key chairs will come together and just look to see what type of adjustments we need to make based on that final guidance. Then we will look at revising those recommendations, as I said, based on the guidance. And then July 13th is your next board meeting. And we are prepared then to bring a final plan and final recommendations for you all to consider for adoption. And then July 24th is our target date to communicate over this month of July the options that families have, and look at July 24th as a date that we're trying to target where families would tell us which one they want to choose, whether they want to stay 100% remote or whether they want to pick one of the blended learning options presented, to start staffing for that and planning for that. And that sort of drives those numbers for everything. Pat?
So I just wanted to again say that, first of all, that was a lot. We realize that. We also recognize that it's not smooth sailing from here on out. Even once we get into the fall, we're going to have to constantly
watch TV.
The flexibility word is a big word, and we just have to be able to roll with the punches. And I think the teams that put together this this plan or these plans. And as we're moving forward, we are very flexible. We're going to look at the guidelines and we're going to implement as well as we can. I've referenced in a few meetings that it's kind of like Miss Barbara from Romper Room, for those of you that were around then. You can't please everybody all the time. So we're trying to keep the health and safety of our students and staff and families in mind and communicate as much as we can. So with that being said, I'll throw it back to Patrick, and I think it's time for questioning.
Good. Thank you so much, Pat. And I do want to say we are going to open it up to questions. I laid out a small format for the group, so we'll go in rounds for comments and questions from our board members. If you could limit it to one comment or question and one follow-up if needed per round, and then we'll go back around and catch you again, and we'll go in alphabetical order. So as the first person is thinking of what they'd like to open with, I just want to say, again, thank you to Dr. James, to Dr. McWilliams-Woods, to Pat Shipe, to Michael Householder for all of your leadership, to all of our restart teams. I mean, the work that you guys have done is absolutely incredible. And I think we've heard that flexibility is the key here. There's still a lot of additional information to come from our state and local partners before we finalize any plans. And we'll continue to adjust as we go. You've taken so much time out of your evening. This is an extra meeting for you too, after all of the ones that you've already had. So thank you for taking the time to walk us through all of that. We really appreciate it. This was a fantastic presentation. So with that, we're going to open it up. Dr. Akbar, if you'd like to kick us off with a question or comment.
Yes, thank you very much, Patrick. But also to everyone, I can't say everybody's name who presented. There was so many people, but thank you all of you who presented, and everyone on the team who did this work. Pat and Dr. McWilliams-Woods, thank you for leading the effort and the charge. I know this probably is in there somewhere, but I just went back through the presentation to see if I missed it. We've been doing, or you all have been doing, a lot of work with the connectors, specifically those students who are having challenges connecting on or need additional resources and assistance. I saw and I heard Carla mention the family resource centers and expanding that to different locations, which I think is amazing, actually. But I wondered specifically about the choice that we're giving our parents and families to whether they want their child to be in a blended learning or fully in the building classroom or 100% online. What if a student that you've identified would be in that extra need or needs-based category, but they choose, or their families choose, for them to stay at home? I'm wondering what additional supports do we provide for those students? And if you mentioned it, I'm sorry that I missed it.
No, that's okay. Okay, that's an excellent question, actually, because we are in a position that we can provide that 100% remote if that's what a family chooses. And we can provide supports and wraparound supports in that environment similar to what we did this spring. Now, certainly students with severe disabilities, for example, we talked about getting their therapies and things like that that really are accommodated better in a face-to-face, site-based manner. We would recommend for those types of therapies and things like that. But we are going to make sure that families have that choice across that continuum, that if a family member of a student with significant needs does need that remote learning, we will do everything we can to accommodate them in that remote setting. And some students may need to choose that because of health reasons. For themselves or for a family member. So I think there's going to be a wide variety of reasons why families choose what they do.
Good. Thank you, Dr. Akbar. Any follow-up?
I just want to thank you for that feedback. I just know that we've been talking about I forget what it's called, the digital slide or whatever the slide thing is that we've been talking about. I just think about I'm like, I know it's a slide, but it's not fun. But I just wanted to make sure that we don't end up with a academic year slide based off of just important needs based off the students.
I think one of the advantages with how we've designed the recommendations that we shared with you is that we can individually work with each family to figure out which models work. We do want families to pick something for a semester, and then if it's not working, we can make adjustments and change. Just because with such strict social distancing rules and the other health rules that we're going to have in place, it's going to be hard for us to have different numbers coming in and out all the time that would kick us over the 12 feet or 12 per class and the 6 feet social distancing. But certainly we can counsel and work with families over the next 6 weeks to make a great decision in terms of what's best for their students.
And if I could, I just also wanted to point out that we talked earlier about differentiating for all of our students to make sure that every student and family gets what they need. So we're also concerned about gifted students taking a slide and science students and language students. So we'll be able to reach out to any of those students as well as our high needs students if they're in a remote setting.
Thank you for that. Mr. Alexander?
Yes, I want to also thank the superintendent, administration, AEA, all the Restart teams. This is a lot of work, and I know you guys put the time into it, and I have been out telling people that our teams have put in a lot of work, and it's a lot of work right now, so they need to bear with us and be there to support us with all the work that we're doing. I'm also thankful and glad that we looked at this technology 7 years ago and began to say that, hey, we want to look at maybe this one-to-one or one-to-world. And that was a godsend and a blessing for us because we didn't know that COVID was coming. And with it coming, it made it so much easier for us because there are a lot of school districts and a lot of board members I know across the country. They're having a tough time and have had a tough time. And I've had a couple even reach out to me and say, what are you guys doing as far as restarting? So we're doing a lot of good work, and I want to thank you guys for that. My question is, it's kind of twofold. With the PPEs, are we going to provide all that for the students, such as the masks? And the actual other part of the question is, if we do supply those masks, are these kids, they're supposed to wear them at school, they're supposed to wear them when they come to the bus. What happens if they forget the mask and they don't have it? Will we have some extras at the school for them? What if they don't have it to get on the bus? Will there be some there at the bus so they can get it? Because that can become expensive, and I know we have to make sure that parents remind those kids, hey, don't forget the mask, make sure they wear the mask and so forth. But that will probably happen. So what are we going to do as far as that?
This is David. I'll answer that. So for disposable masks, because there's two issues. From where I sit, I think it's better to provide the masks, disposable masks. Now, there are masks that are, you can wash them, but my issue will be when kids come to school, have they been washed the night before? We may have to wash them ourselves if we're going to have that many, re-wearable masks. But there's some issues there. And then trying to get the right one to the right kid. So I'm not too sure about that. But with the disposable mask, and depending on the price they are, we could probably have those available, on the bus at the entry to the building. And then with the disposable mask, there will probably have to be multiple changes, per day. So those are some of the things that we'll be looking at. Again, once the governor's guidelines come out, the committee will go back and look at that and then give us a recommendation.
Okay. Yeah, because I want the public to hear that too, because that can become very expensive. And we already looked at what we're spending just on those PPEs already, and being at a point where you don't have a whole lot of money too. I mean, we're trying to make sure the kids and staff are safe. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone out there understood that is a priority, and that is a major safety issue for everyone, teachers, staff, families, community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. Ms. Autry?
Thank you. And like the folks who went before me said, I just want to thank everybody on this team for their hard work. It's very impressive. I know it's not an easy task. I know we're not going to satisfy everybody. I just have a couple comments. I am excited and happy for the opportunity for us to finally have decreased class sizes. I think that's going to go really far for our children, and I think it's going to also help our teachers be even better. So I appreciate that silver lining in the pandemic. A thought that came to mind is we need a career path in our college career academy for tracers or cleaners or screeners. I don't know if Rachel Tech is on this call or not, but we should maybe be thinking about that.
I actually love that idea, because that may be around for a long time, right? Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I was surprised at the 79% of folks who want their kids to come back in person. I guess I was a little shocked at that. So just with that in mind, was there any conversation about like a lottery, in case we just can't make those accommodations logistically? I know you mentioned at the younger ages we're likely able to do that, but with that many folks wanting to come back in person, are we going to consider a lottery, or how would that work?
I think Ellen wants to answer this, but I do want to say that I don't think there were many teachers that were surprised that the parents wanted to send their kids back to school.
Right. They learned what it was like to be a teacher at home, right? All day, every day. So the data that I think is important, because that data is very similar to statewide data, surveys that have been done, kind of that same scientific random sample of parents, and nationally, especially when you look at the regional Midwest data, it's about the same. Now, the parents were asked that without knowing what their choice was, coming back to school. It was just, what is your plan? Are you prepared and ready to send your student back to school? Now they'll have, after July 13th, they'll have more tangible models that they can look at to help make that decision. And they'll hear all of the details of our safety guidelines that we'll put in place to make sure that we're caring for their children so carefully. So I do think that we're pleased to see that number. We have run numbers with 10% of our students going remote and looking at what kind of impact. We've been running all the numbers based on K2 being full-time, site-based. What's that impact? So we believe that we can make that accommodation using all the different staff that we have in the district to prioritize those young children, the students with more significant need, and then to be able to still provide the support for the blended models for the other grades.
Thank you, Ms. Autry. Any follow-up?
I do have a follow-up related comment, and it's more of a comment because I don't know if we have the answer, but I guess I'm thinking about our liability as we're entering back in the classrooms. No matter what the size are, there's still that risk out there. I mean, is there some discussion about special insurance we're going to need for folks who might decide they're not happy if their child got sick, or they think, trace it back to us? Just a thought.
There have been some conversations across the country in different areas, like different waivers, and we are certainly talking to our insurance company about, liability. But I think we're okay as long as we're following the health guidelines, that will be coming out, and the existing guidelines from the Ohio Department of Health and our Summit County Public Health Department.
And I think our
Thank you so
mindset is going into this, and Pat Shipe did a nice job laying this out towards the beginning of the presentation. We are assuming that this is kids and families are going to need to be fluid in terms of coming in, and we're going to find a student or a faculty member who's been exposed. They'll be going home for 14 days. We'll have these procedures to immediately deploy because of our tech infrastructure, and we're going to continue all site-based classrooms. We'll still be using their Google Classrooms and the Google platform, all the digital curriculum. They'll still be using that even though they're site-based, so that if a student ends up having to go home, it's seamless, or even a class or a school gets shut down or the city, it's seamless. The students are already using the Google Classroom, and that'll just continue during their remote days, and then they come back. So that seamless system, I think, will help with families that end up having individual health crises as we go, or faculty.
Thank you, Dr. Hall.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Appreciate it. I know I'm going to sound redundant, but I have to sort of echo the earlier comments and thanking everybody for the huge amount of work that you guys have all put in, guys and gals have all put in to putting together. I think every people, that's a lot. That's probably thousands of man hours and woman hours that have gone into that. So again, I think we have to, as my colleagues have already done, have to acknowledge the huge, sort of amount of effort and time that's gone into this. So again, I just want to say, Ellen and Pat, for your own leadership as well. Honestly, I have a plethora of questions. I know that we're limited in time tonight, and I suspect that when I go back through the slide deck, that a number of those questions I'll be able to answer going back to the slide deck. So I'll use my time tonight to kind of, and Ms. Autry stole my thunder that Ms. Autry had. One to the survey results. I was really curious, and again, I don't want to, I'm sure debate sort of the science of the survey, but I am really keen to know, because this is that community engagement piece, right? So I am keen to know sort of, if we have 20,000 students, how many responses do we get back in absolute terms? And we have 4,500 staff members, so teachers, principals, et cetera, right? Custodians, our lunch workers. How many responses do we get in absolute terms? Because I see percentages, but I'm keen to sort of know what was the sort of response rate. That's my question, and it relates to Diana's sort of follow-up question around the liabilities. I think that's an area that we're going to have to spend a lot more time unpacking, because there are retail businesses and that have very stringent SOPs about how they clean, and the checklists that are being signed off by salary management. And liability stems from our ability to be able to not only say that we have guidelines, but to be able to prove that we're actually following them, right? And how do we audit? The following of said protocols around cleaning and things like that, right? So that's my comment. I know that there's a whole lot more unpacking that's going to have to happen, but go back to my question. It was really about the surveys, and really wanted to understand that piece, because that's that community part. For example, one of the questions you talked about was the 79% of parents would, preferring their kids to go back to school. And, Ellen, I think you said this a little bit earlier. The question wasn't phrased to say, do you want to go back to school in the fall despite the risk of COVID? Is saying, hey, if you had your druthers, would you like your kids to go back to school, or do you prefer them to do online learning as we move forward? I think that was my read on the comment on that. It wasn't saying that despite the risk of COVID, that you want your kids to go back to school anyway. Is that right? And see the floor back to you for the survey sort of responses.
Yeah, that specific question was, there were questions about what had happened in the spring regarding the closure and all of the impact of COVID. And then the questions led to now looking forward, knowing this is now all COVID is still here, now looking forward to the next year, what is your plan? I think what's best for us, because there were multiple surveys and multiple focus groups on both the faculty and the parent side, that I'll send you all the board members an email that says.
Okay, sorry, I'm not sure if my internet's on their fritz or not. Were you able to hear my questions?
Yes, yeah, you're a little bit delayed off your visual, but it's okay. We got everything. I will send an email that outlines the sample size that we used for the surveys and what the response rate was, et cetera, and because there's so many, it'll be difficult for me to go through that right now. And I'll get you the exact numbers for that. One other thing that I wanted to mention that I forgot to mention during our school models that just hasn't come up yet in the questions, but I imagine this will be a common question from families, is we also, the way we designed the recommendation for the blended learning, where students go for 2 days and then they're remote for 3 days, is that we can accommodate that. If you have siblings across, one family has maybe a pre-K 2, and then a third grader, and then an 8th grader, we can work with the families if they want that lined up so that they're going to school at the same time. We can accommodate that. And we'll be working with families on that type of schedule to make sure that we can accommodate that.
Thank you. Dr. Hall, any follow-up? Okay, I think you said no, and it's going to come through the audio in a second. So, Ms. Mansfield.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for that presentation. I do have to say it was both a joy and an overwhelming task. Mrs. McKettrick and I got to listen in as flies on the wall to the committees, and there were several times where I felt like I needed to just breathe into a paper bag or sit down and have a couple deep breaths listening to all the decisions that were being and scenarios that were being brought up. It was just amazing to listen the last couple of weeks. There are so many questions that I want to start with our littlest people right now, just to start out. With our teachers in the elementary classrooms, first of all, there's going to be a huge learning curve, right, on our next normal, new normal, whatever you want to call it. And we teach them everything right now, from how to stand in line, to go to the restroom, which is new, right, to how to move from space to space. So our teachers will find an amazing way to do it. Do we have a plan for starting to educate on mask use? Because that is new to all of us, right? We're still as adults learning when and how to use masks. Then another piece and part to that is, I have a little bit of a question about how the elementary day will work as far as, do the teachers move for that half day, or do the students just move? So in other words, when they're coming in, then we're switching from you being with your core teachers to going to your specials. Does the teacher stay put, or do the specials come to the students? Start there.
So we'll answer that first. Pat, do you want to?
Sure.
Take that first.
So a couple of things. Lisa, I think that through this whole process, what Ellen and I have come to realize is that we all have our doubts and panicky moments. We're just not allowed to have them at the same time. And that's kind of
right
with us. A lot of those questions that you bring up as far as masks and there's still a lot of detail that the work in front of us will address. How do little ones learn how to use a mask and keep them on? What happens if any student says, I'm done with this mask and throws it off, or if there's, any disagreements between students and it gets physical, all those details, we're gonna have to figure out a protocol and do the best we can in the buildings. As far as the elementary school day, with the safety guidelines in effect and all the guidelines as far as cleaning and social distancing, we're really looking for the students to stay put. And if there's any change in teacher or subject, it would be the adults moving. Now that can be impacted by what the governor says in the next day or two, and we'll look at it at that time. But truly, it will be much more. It's going to be a better choice to keep students in place and have teachers move. And Ellen, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I was just going to add to the instruction part, that whole part, especially with the youngest ones, but this came up pre-K through 12. I think the family engagement team, the mental health and transition team also brought up the fact that we're going to have very careful instruction and whole new routines around, similar to what we do with positive behavior supports, where you have to teach those routines and behaviors, like how you walk through the hallway, keeping the social distancing, appropriate mask, appropriate hand washing. Both of those teams heavily brought up in our health advisory team about protocols that we're going to have to put in place to make sure that students are taught the appropriate way to do it, and our faculty as well.
I was going to say, I've seen a lot of adults walking around with masks down around their necks. So yeah, that's everybody.
Right. So true. So I appreciate, and I know our teachers are so incredibly creative. When you see a group of 30 students moving silently through a hallway, and you're like, how on earth did that happen, right? Just getting pre-K and kindergartners to move as a group is, herding cats is easier than that, I think. So I know that they'll come up with incredible ways, and I just want us to help them with that. I guess I'll just throw in one more comment, and then I'll if we come back around, we can touch on something else. But if not, I just want to throw this out there too. I know we talked a lot about the mental health piece, or we talked some. We haven't talked a lot about anything. We just talked about a lot. The mental health piece and COVID and our families. But I just want to say out loud, I know that this summer and this spring, the social justice piece is going to also be a huge mental health piece. And I know that everything's going to kind of work hand in hand, but I want to make sure that we're also focusing on that and as part of our mental health care as our students come back. Some of the things that are happening are wonderful and glorious, and some of them are terrifying and frightening. And we've seen things on television that are really awful for grownups, and I can't imagine if you're a little person. So I know we're going to do that. I want to add that to our mental health piece as we're coming back. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we can emphasize here what we said at the beginning when Pat and I opened this, is that we have sets this heavy focus on our district focus now, but then this next 5 years, what does that look like? And I think one of the major lessons learned from the spring that we talked about at the beginning is sort of refocusing what is critical and important. And I think the Department of Education is seeing that as well. It really wraps more around our portrait of a graduate. Those competencies are the most important thing. And part of that is being culturally responsive and accepting. And those types of, processing what has happened with students and creating environments for that. I look forward to this opportunity. Just like Ms. Autry said, you've got 12 students or less now in your classroom. You have opportunities at the high school level to bring students in for discussion groups and projects more. That's what we want to focus on, and take advantage of this opportunity to really focus more on that hands-on project discussion, student voice. This is the time when we can do that. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. Ms. McKittrick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I too would like to add my appreciation for the massive effort that was this extraordinary work on this reopening plan. So thank you to the 140 people involved. It's a remarkable effort. Thank you. My first question is about how meal distribution will look for our remote students.
I would let Deborah Folk answer that question because obviously because of the different models, we're going to have to look at different ways of providing meal service, but I know they have begun that exploration and discussion.
Thank you.
At this point, we are happy to report that the United States Department of Agriculture has allowed the waivers that allowed us to do the grab-and-go bags to be extended for the entire 2021 school year. So therefore, should we be wanting to put something together for somebody who's totally remote, we are in the process of looking what that may look like and how we would adjust our serving to do that actual item. It still could be a grab and go. It may be around a certain time frame. As you are aware, we're currently doing 2 meals a day, a breakfast and a lunch. And then on Thursdays, we're providing 2 breakfasts and 2 lunches. So I think we have to realize what the plan is to when students will actually be there and figure out what we can do to provide them. I'm not really sure at this point, Ms. McKittrick, exactly what adults are going to be available because I don't see some of the students being able to get to school easily, and that would be part of our outreach to families as we put these plans together. But at least we have the opportunity to allow students to take these meals off campus as we have done since March the 17th.
Okay, thank you, because my concern will be for those kids who are remote, but maybe don't have the ability to get to a pickup site. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McKittrick, a follow-up?
Nope, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Akbar?
Yes. I thought Lisa was going here, but I don't know if she did exactly. So I also have a question about masks, and specifically about there's this no mandated mask movement going on in this country. And I'm wondering, like, what do we do if a staff member, a parent, or even a student doesn't want to wear a mask? What are our expectations and how do we plan on responding?
Our recommendation right now is that staff and students from our reopening team, that we need to all wear masks. Obviously, there's work that has to be done in terms of what does that mean for staff? How will we handle the medical exceptions, and for students as well? Superintendent?
Yeah, so just in terms of staff, every week I have a meeting with our union presidents, and I think, I can say with confidence, they're all concerned. I'm sure they're hearing from their members about what's going to happen in the fall. The governor in one of our meetings mentioned it himself. If you have a 55, 60-year-old bus driver and you have, between, 11 or 22 kids coming in on a bus and they don't have masks, I'm pretty sure the bus driver will want a mask. So I think we're hearing it loud and clear from our employees that, number one, they want to be protected. But number two, if you look at the data from this weekend and today, we are definitely seeing increases in the rate of infections in Ohio, primarily in, I think, Southwest Ohio. So it's a concern, and that's something that, we'll be consulting, with our legal counsel on that, consulting with the Department of Health. My opinion is I think we should start the school year requiring everyone who's entering our buildings to wear masks, because this is a safety issue. I understand people have varying opinions. There's some medical professionals that don't believe masks are necessary, but for our organization, with the number of kids that we would have and the number of staff members that we would have in and out of buildings, I think the wearing of masks is a prudent move, unless there is some a medical reason why someone couldn't wear a mask, and we may have to find some alternate for our employees. We may have to do some alternate work for those folks, just to reasonable accommodations for whatever health concerns. But I think what you'll see in the final plan is most likely expectation that masks will be worn, and then we'll have legal look at what some of the ramifications were if we're going to put someone on complete, online instruction if they decide they won't wear a mask. And how political this has become. There will be people who are going to challenge that, and we'll just have to be prepared to deal with it.
Yes, and I definitely agree that it is political, which is why I asked, unfortunately, that it is a political thing when it's health related. But I guess one of the things I'll offer, maybe two brief things. Maybe we should consider some type of pledge or creed that, everyone in our community will agree to take care of each other. And one way is to wear a mask. That's one of those ways. And that everyone signs this creed, or whatever we're calling it, agreement, community agreement, to protect one another, and that they will wear a mask. And we have even parents do it, and community organizations do it as well, who want to work in our school buildings. So that's just a thought to create this culture of care.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Alexander?
I have I think it was brought up a little earlier in reference to training for our staff and the students, but what about for the parents as far as safety with masks, with cleaning, with bringing their kids to school properly, with being healthy, period. Will we have training for everyone on that?
And before you answer, just want to point out for the record that Miss Autry has another commitment and needs to sign off, so she is exiting the meeting. She's not losing connection. Thank you.
Mr. Alexander, in the first recommendation from the family engagement team, in the detail of that recommendation, it is all spelled out about needing to provide resources and support and education for families around COVID-19 in general, but then also prevention, safety measures, and additional safety measures that we will support and train and educate.
Okay, and that'll go to everyone before we restart school or reopen, correct?
Yes, and some of that has started now with some of the information that we've put out, but it will get much more targeted going all the way. Especially, we needed to hold off on a few things until we saw the governor and the State Department of Ed guidance to make sure we didn't put anything out that wasn't aligned with that. But we'll be able to go full force as soon as this week, as soon as we get the information.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Hall?
I think he's muted.
Yeah, I think you're muted, Doctor.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Okay. I had called in on the telephone, and apparently my telephone audio was not working either, so I'm not sure what the problem is tonight. Wow, this is frustrating. Okay. So I've got a comment and a question, and I'm going to try to talk slow because I suspect there's probably a delay going on still. My comment is, I think that the legalities of this are going to this political. I think the legalities here could get out of hand very quickly, especially with respect to something as seemingly simple as requiring students to wear a mask. There are probably potent arguments that can be made about an entity receiving federal and/or state funds requiring, when the federal government and state government just does not require a mask. If we were to then require a mask, I could see some issues there arising. So again, for the record, yes, fully support mask wearing as being I can see a number of legal issues as well. We think about our staff members, family members, grandparents who may contract the virus as a result of exposure from students. There could be lawsuits that sort of arise from there. So again, I don't want to kind of be the negative one, but I really see this endeavor as being one where if we're not careful, I remember that we should be planning for the worst case scenario in a lot of fashion with respect to the legal component. Let me pause there. Were you able to hear my comment?
Go ahead. Yes. Yeah, go ahead if you have a question. We heard you. Yes, we can hear you.
Are you all able to hear me?
Yes.
Oh, you can? Okay. Again, my apologies. So my question though is my colleagues have asked a lot of really good questions. As other questions that we have may arise, is there a recommendation about how those questions kind of get filtered to the same place? I don't want to be asking the same questions that somebody else is asking. So again, we'll get for some guidance as to sort of how we get these questions to you all.
I think because
share back out with the other folks who are on the board.
Right. I think because the superintendent is so connected with the
hey, I'm sorry.
state department.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we were able to hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just dialed in with the phone. So I missed the start of your response. And again, my apologies to the group for my IT issues.
That's okay. I think we heard the question okay. In terms of the process for questions, I think for now, because the superintendent is so connected in with the State Department with all of the restart guidance, if everything gets channeled from the board to him, he also knows a lot of that will go to the health advisory team and then to legal counsel to work through. Unfortunately, we have Tanya Burford from the Summit County Public Health right next.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just dialed in with the phone. So I missed the start of yours. Again, my apologies to the group for my IT issues.
I think because the delay is so extended, I think it's best if I just email you after and let you know that what the process should be for all of the board to ask questions and to process those. And I'll put that in writing to everybody just because the delay is so extended. Are there any other questions?
Let's give him a second to get a response.
Ellen? Can you hear me okay? No more questions.
Thank you. And you may want to mute as that feed continues to come through. Okay.
I missed again.
Ended. Any other questions?
Let's give him a second to get a response.
No more questions.
All right, thank you. Thank you for your patience. We'll get that worked out. Maybe we can work with Dr. Hall and make sure that we all have a good connection. We appreciate that. And Dr. Hall will make sure you don't miss anything. If you think you do, send me a private message as well, either in the chat, or if you really think you're missing something, shoot me a text or give me a call, and I'll halt the meeting for a minute so that we can make sure you don't miss anything. Ms. Mansfield?
Thank you. Again, we'll keep questions going to the superintendent as well. You touched on this, Mr. Superintendent, just a little bit about staff members who might feel that they can't, or for whatever health reason, aren't able to come back to a full classroom. Can you touch on that a little bit? And then on that same note, will the same person who's doing the in-person delivery be also the same teacher delivering that information in the online sector? So if you're teaching English 9, and will you, in person, will you also be the person teaching English 9 online? I think I asked that right.
Ellen, you want to handle that one at least, and then I'll go back to the one about the mask.
Sure. So the first question is that we anticipate, and when a staff member, when we look at the families and once they make the choice, who is going to be 100% remote and who is going to be in one of the blended models that we went through. We will staff that accordingly. So the students that are 100% remote will be taught by faculty who are 100% remote. And that will accommodate some of our faculty who do have underlying health conditions and are unable to come in because of the health risk. We can accommodate that because they can be part of the 100% remote faculty for those students. So it'll be two separate groups of students because the blended teachers will be teaching every day a group of students coming in, or the project groups coming in at the high school. So they're not going to be able to accommodate the 100% remote students as well. So those will be two separate faculty.
And Mrs. Mansfield, in terms of, staff that may feel uncomfortable teaching in person, I mean, the reason why, we have this flexibility is because, to be honest with you, we're in uncharted territory. We do not know how this is all going to play out. Many of our employees, from March until the end of the school year, voiced a lot of concerns about coming to work in person. And I'm sure we'll have the same thing happen, this fall with some of our people, particularly if we don't see a more, leveling off of the current spike, or until a vaccine is done. And there's so many, unknowns. I think, really our path moving forward for all those, detailed medical issue questions, we will just continue, to work with Summit County Public Health. And I mean, I just have to give a shout out to Donna Skoda, because she and her staff have been great, during this whole time. And they've devoted a lot of time to us, and we're in the middle of a pandemic and they have to deal with the whole county. So, I can't really answer that question. I wish I could, because there's, it gets emotional with people. I think, what Dr. Hall was saying, there will probably be, lots of litigation, even for us with sovereign immunity. There are issues, but we're just gonna, when the guidance comes out this week, we'll review that, and that, I'm sure, will guide a lot of how we're going to move forward.
Could I just add something, Dave, if you don't mind?
Sure.
So, I can't speak for the other labor unions, but we have almost 2,400 members in our union. And I'm not talking about the members that are compromised in any way or live with somebody who's compromised. But I would say the remaining ones, the vast majority of our teachers want to do what's best for the students, obviously, and what's best to keep everybody safe. I will say that, and things can change. I agree with David. Things are going to change and ebb and flow. But out of all those 2,400 members, I have had less than one handful pushback as far as I'm not going to wear a mask. So I think I would assume that the rest of the labor units are pretty similar. People want to do, for the most part, what's right, and people want to keep everybody safe, staff and students. So with that being said, we just have to prepare ourselves for any changes in guidelines, for any changes in what COVID does in this area. But I think I want to have I want to have faith in our employees that they're going to do what's best. Thank you.
So my question was more about our employees and their health. I'm not really concerned. I'm assuming we're going to have people doing the right thing, whatever those guidelines are. I want to know what I guess the question was more about the process. The overwhelming majority of teachers I've heard from all can't wait to get back to their kids. It's all I heard all through March, April, May. It's all I heard is, when can I see my kids? Can we say goodbye? There were so many things. My question is more about if they live with someone who is health compromised. If they are health compromised, how are we going to take care of them? So I just wanted to make sure, and I don't have to have that answer tonight for sure. I just want to clarify. I'm not saying, I believe our teachers are going to do the right thing. I believe that they want to be in the classroom more than they want to be, to their own health detriment, most of them, right? I mean, most of them will be there whether they physically should be there or not. That's what I've seen. So I just want to make sure that we're taking care of those folks.
Right.
And I just want to clarify, I wasn't inferring that you meant anything different than what you just said.
Right. Yeah, I just want to make sure, because it's so hard for some of them. That's all I'm hearing is about their kids. Yeah. So I'm glad also they might get a goodbye, because I heard that a lot.
Yeah.
the record too, I just want to point out, left the meeting. It was not just a technology issue. He also had another commitment. He had a hard stop at 8 o'clock and he kind of went past that as well. So he let me know that he had to leave the meeting. Just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
What I was going to say in addressing Mrs. Mansfield's question is, that's really what I'm talking about. People who have some underlying medical conditions who do have fears about whether it's coming to school or going to the grocery store or, being out in public, that we have procedures for people who have special conditions. I mean, those are some of the things that we have to do, in the absence of COVID, where we work with many of our employees who may have issues that they're dealing with, and we can work through HR for those employees.
And remember that educators in that group we're going to need, because we're going to have 10% approximately, or whatever it turns out to be, students learning remotely. So those teachers can be prioritized for the group that is remote. So it may work out beautifully in terms of the numbers.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Ms. McKittrick?
Thank you. So my question is about the survey and the kids whose parents choose to keep them at home. And the survey indicated that some of those families would like training. And I'm wondering what that training, if you could just explain a little bit more what kind of training will be provided to them.
Between Carla Chapman and Karen Gijic, do you want to talk about the vision of the virtual training for families?
I'm happy to jump in.
Okay, go ahead, Karen.
I go first, Carla, you can come second. Is that all right? So the teachers know that the parents had been asking about some virtual supports, so that if we could design some quick videos with some side-by-side companion documents to help parents when they're at home with students who may have issues logging in or knowing what happens next. Because our parents may not have ever worked in a virtual, or our grandparents in a connected learning environment, there's some supports that we need to put in place to enable our parents to support the students as they would if we were not in a connected learning environment.
Yeah, Karen, I don't have much else to add to that. Parents are looking for easily understood training opportunities and guidance to move their students along through curriculum content while at home. And I emphasize easy to understand, so that where they are, we meet them where they are and allow and equip them to support their students in ways that matter the most.
And the only thing I would add is that we have, for these 7 years that we've really built up our whole tech platform, we have offered through our Title I funds parent trainings on a lot of our digital tools in the schools. But you can imagine the sense of urgency to actually really know how to use them now. It's very different when you're learning them just as a soft learn on what your kids are doing versus now being home with them. So we have some of those tools already built that we can redeploy this summer and into the fall, especially once we see where students end up in that continuum of options.
Quick follow-up. Is there any kind of guidance available beyond tech support?
For families, for just how to do remote learning?
Yes.
Yes. And that also is outlined in the family engagement plan in terms of how to support children at home, how to put together schedules for their learning, where to go to get help. I mean, all of the kind of the wraparound support, motivation type techniques, that was all outlined in the family engagement plan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McKittrick. Dr. Akbar?
Yes, this technology sometimes. I just want to thank everyone for everything and just know that this is an ever moving target. And like I think Dr. James said, you know, we know what we know now, but as we know more, we will know more. I just want to just make one personal or one additional comment, just related to my community of care. I think it's very important that all of us, as we are in uncharted territories, that we just have a little bit of dignity and respect for one another, and a little of grace goes a long way. And I don't think that public health and the health and safety of our family members and our community members is a political thing. And if we're going to be in person at all in our schools, we have to take the highest precautions. So not just the minimum precautions that the state may say, you should do. We need to take the highest precautions and set the standard of expectations to build this community of care. And if someone doesn't want to wear a mask or go about what those standards and expectations are that the district set, I think we need to also set another expectation that we will still provide your education for you, but not in our school buildings. Because again, we need to do whatever we can to protect everyone within our community. And wearing a mask for people in person is not necessarily, I don't think it's an option. And I haven't heard that it's an option based off this presentation. So we want to make sure that everyone makes it home safely at night. And that's our highest priority. And so I thank each and every one of you for keeping that in mind and doing that. And hopefully our public and our community will agree with that and will oblige and know that we might have to restrict you if you don't. And there's no love lost, but we still will have the highest quality education for you.
Thank you, Dr. Akbar. Mr. Alexander?
I just echo what Dr. Akbar said, and I have nothing further to say.
Thank you. Ms. Mansfield?
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to reserve the rest of my questions. I'll send some out. I appreciate all the feedback. People are really concerned. I'm already getting messages that are flying at my phone, but I'd also ask all the families and parents out there and teachers too, to take a deep breath and to see what the guidelines are that come out, and also know this is just this. We were very clear that this is a draft and that we're going to talk about it and that these guidelines are going to come in. The last screen that Ellen showed was about what the timeline is for when decisions and announcements are going to be made. So this is just the beginning. This is not, school doesn't start tomorrow. So as the messages are flying in, let's remember that we do have a little time. And I thank Dr. Akbar for all those positive remarks. This is still going to be the best free public education. This is going to be the best education. And we're going to work like crazy to make sure that happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mansfield. Ms. McKittrick?
Want to express again my appreciation for all the work that's gone into this presentation and the presentation itself. And at this time, I have no further questions.
Thank you. It sounds like we might be finished with questions, but throw it out there one more time. Is there anything else that anyone would like to add? Hearing none, I'm going to reserve my questions because you guys have asked a lot of the things that were on my mind or in my heart. So I appreciate it. The community that we have a very competent and dedicated group of folks that have come together. The health and safety of our students is absolutely our number one priority. Went into this. Thank you for including us in the conversation and for letting us be party to the committee meetings that were going on. I enjoyed jumping around those and listening to what people had to say, taking time out of an otherwise busy schedule, clearly walk us through the recommendations. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. Is there any other business to come before the board tonight?
No, Mr. President.
We'll take a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. McKittrick, Mr. Alexander, and even a third by Dr. Akbar. You can identify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you so much. This concludes our special meeting.
Good night, everyone.
Everybody, good evening.
Stay well.